So we're joined today by Maria Onyango, the Head of Talent Acquisition and Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at the Telegraph Media Group. Maria, you've got a wide range of experience in this area. I'd love to ask you a couple of questions. So, Maria, can I ask you, what do you think are the key components for an effective and deliverable diversity and inclusion strategy? And what perhaps do you think are some of the more common mistakes?
Yeah, very good question. It's going to be a really boring answer. I think often these things are. So in my opinion, it has to be as much as possible based on data, right? You said effective and deliverable. You need to understand what your starting point is. It's very easy to implement sort of nice sounding initiatives that don't have any impact, that don't solve the issues that your organization has, or in fact speaks to an issue that your organization doesn't have. So the more time you can put into developing your kind of base and grounding and foundation of data, the better. I know that's tough, right? That can be a long haul, multiple conversations with stakeholders, with legal, and it's easy just to put on a couple of events and do a couple of partnerships. But if you don't know the issue that you're trying to solve, then that's a very difficult thing to measure. The other thing I would say in terms of a key component for something that's effective and deliverable is it being bespoke. There are a lot of organizations out there who promise to just solve all your D&I needs. And you know, a lot of things that every kind of head of D&I or D&I specialist will do. And there's a reason for that. Some of those make sense, but really thinking about the size of your organization, the demographics you have in your organization, and critically your commercial goals. Diversity, inclusion, belonging is part of a commercial business strategy, not kind of CSR based. Even though it often sits in HR, it's a commercial piece as well, so you can't lose sight of that. So those would be my my kind of three key things. And lastly, I guess I have a fourth, measurable. Again, with D&I, it's easy to implement initiatives that look good and make your organization look good because they're being done. And so sometimes people will reward you for things that are not necessarily measurable. So you have to be very honest with yourself and very honest with your stakeholders about what the ROI is. And if the ROI is just, this is a really nice, engaging thing to do, that will be great from an internal kind of comms perspective, and we need to make sure that we're covering this basis to show our support, then fine, as long as you're open about the fact that that might not be moving the needle on the gender or ethnicity pay gap, for example.
Yeah, I mean, on the point about the measurement, and you touched on two points just a second ago, but do you think there are key things that any organization should be measuring?
Oh, good question. It depends on your organization. It's very easy. I work in a UK based business. We have some smaller offices outside the UK, but primarily in the UK. So data collection from our perspective is a little bit simpler. If you're in an international organization, it would be very easy for me to say, right, you need to have ethnicity, LGBT data, but that might not be appropriate for the cultural legislation in the regions you're dealing with. So I think it's good to do a bit of an audit, in the beginning in terms of what data do we have, what data is it appropriate and possible to collect. Let's be as ambitious as we can with that. But when we think about the change that we want to achieve, what's the baseline data that we need for that? So look, I would always want to have demographic data for the internal internal colleagues as much as possible. And I'm very lucky that I have it here. Recruitment data I've just implemented, and I've been waiting a long time to get that over the line, so I'm thrilled. As much market data as possible to contextualize yourself within the market. I'm also very much looking forward to the census data here in the UK coming out, because that is long overdue, and that's going to be very useful for a lot of people, so I'd encourage everyone to look at that.
Do that. Fantastic. Thank you. From an early careers strategy perspective, and I know this in an area you've done a lot of work in, what do you think are the key elements for a great early career strategy? So covering graduates, apprentices, interns, the whole spectrum. And again, specifically, what elements of those are most effective in engaging the most diverse audience of young people?
Yeah, good question. So I think this is probably two separate questions, right? Because the early career strategy is a EVP and a recruitment strategy, but it's also a pipelining strategy in terms of talent for the organization. So a lot of organizations, and I including myself, we need more diverse candidates in the early career space. Okay, great. So what is actually our early careers plan, and what is it for? Just again from a business perspective, because if you start overlaying diversity onto something that doesn't really have a business purpose or isn't fleshed out, that's never going to land well. So I think in terms of an early career strategy, it's who do we want and why do we want them and what's going to happen to them. And then you can tell a good story, right? From a employer branding and an advertising perspective. And then in terms of diverse candidates, well, one, what do you mean by diversity? Often people mean women. Increasingly they mean brown people. Is sort of what they mean when they're talking about diversity. Some people, some organizations are now talking about neurodiversity, but when you're talking about diversity with your talent acquisition teams or with your line managers, what is it that we actually mean, and why is that important to us as a business? Because if you're just looking for diversity's sake, it's patronizing to candidates, and they will see it coming. Young people are so good at smelling a lack of authenticity in digital comms. I remember being young, said Maria. But I'm very suspicious when people approach me and say, "Oh, we're looking for a diverse candidate." I think, well, I also have a lot of experience in this space, so maybe we care about that. So when you're talking about diversity, and in particular if you're being open about looking for diverse candidates, why? What is it that they're delivering apart from their gender or their skin color? They want to feel valued for who they are, not just the protected characteristics that we are looking for. So I think for me, that's the key thing, is that authenticity. And then the second thing in terms of getting engagement from diverse groups of young people is widening access as early as possible. And this is a trap I've fallen into, right? You have a graduate program. Why aren't we getting more diverse candidates? Well, it's because we don't talk to these young people until they are about to graduate. So what we are doing, and what I think is a great option, is getting younger in terms of the candidates, and widening that access at an earlier stage. So we have just launched, the comms will have gone out by this point, I hope. We've just launched a media literacy program for 16 to 18-year-olds in London schools, and the purpose of that is to widen access and to help them understand the value of quality news in a world of disinformation and kind of fake media, but also to give them the skills that they might need to have a career. We don't expect to be hiring those people in any kind of formal long-term capacity for a little while. It's just about widening access, and it's about talking to that group of people. So those would be my thoughts.
Fantastic.
Oh, sorry, I have another thought. Last thing, sorry. Often the bit that people miss is they go, great, we've hired them. Now off they go into the system that already exists. There's a reason that system doesn't have many diverse people in it. And it's because those systems typically in many organizations weren't created for diverse people, whether that's, and often the difference is socioeconomic, or it might be a male dominated industry or organization, or a very white industry. And essentially what you do is you pump diverse candidates into that system and essentially expect them to assimilate. Support mechanisms, buddies, mentors, confidence sessions, and talk to them about what their needs are. Don't just assume that you know what they might lack or what they might need or what their strengths might be. Because, once again, people go, oh, we want diversity of thought. And I think, well, that's great. But what if you're hiring an ethnic minority person who went to Eton and then Oxford?
Yeah.
Are you getting that? Right. So just be very, very clear about what it is you want and then how you're supporting those people.
So one question that I'd be really interested in your perspective on is, how do you get the balance right between assimilation and individuality? Assimilation, every organization needs a degree of that, otherwise you have chaos. But equally, inclusion is about respecting the individual. So any thoughts on how to get that balance?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a question that I think about a lot, both from a personal perspective and as, someone obviously working in the talent acquisition and D&I space in media, and many media organizations have particular backgrounds. I was actually speaking at an event with young, diverse world changers who were asking exactly the same question. Is it better to bring your whole self to work or to assimilate into whatever the dominant culture is? And the upshot was that a lot of young, diverse candidates are very torn about this and would like some guidance. And I think the conclusion that we came to, and I agree with this, is that a certain level of assimilation is absolutely necessary, right? There will be expectations, there will be kind of ways of working, and that's what makes the world go around. However, within that, it needs to be a level of assimilation, and that's an interesting word, a level of assimilation that you are personally comfortable with, that you can live with, and that helps you in your role, rather than a level of assimilation that doesn't lead to psychological safety. And that was the key thing, was psychological safety, feeling like it was a place where you can broadly be yourself, and bring your culture to work, bring your background to work, use your own accent, talk about your family circumstances. If you're LGBT, talk about your partner, talk about your children, and that can be, that can be an accepted and celebrated part of your existence. But if there are certain ways of kind of behaving in meetings, for example, then as long as those aren't kind of impinging on your personal kind of characteristics, or your kind of specific cultural background, then that's sort of to be expected. But yes, I think it's interesting, particularly with some younger candidates, and social mobility is a huge one for this, is not feeling part of the in crowd. Can you, if you assimilate to the level of just being being a good employee for that organization, are you then allowed to be a part of the in crowd? Are you part of decision-making processes? Do you have a voice in the room? And that's what people are really looking for. At least that's my thoughts. But per that event, a lot of young people and diverse people are really torn about this question. So I don't know if there's 100% a correct answer.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, and that balance is slightly different for each individual. But I think your point about creating, that environment where people can find their own balance, I think that's absolutely the key thing. Very good. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. Brilliant.